Millions of people have read the Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder, which chronicled her family's pioneer life in the Midwest and Great Plains. Ms. Wilder brought great detail to her descriptions, but she also left much out. This week, American Masters premiered a new documentary about her life, which you can still watch on nmpbs.org, by the way. But it reminded us of an interview we did a couple years back with Santa Fe author and Pulitzer Prize winner Caroline Fraser. Prairie Fires, the American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder, sheds new light on the life of this American icon. Here's NMIF correspondent Megan Kamerick with that interview from 2018.
I'm joined by Caroline Fraser, author of Prairie Fires, the American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Thank you so much for joining us, Caroline.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I have to ask you right off, what was it like to win the Pulitzer Prize?
It was very surprising, I have to say. Just always kind of seemed like something that happened to other people, not me. So I was quite surprised, but delighted. I mean, it's a wonderful honor and humbling to have that kind of recognition.
How did you find out?
My husband was actually watching the live stream in his office, unbeknownst to me.
You both worked.
Yes. And he came over to my office and had kind of an odd look on his face, and he said, "You just won the Pulitzer Prize." So that's how I found out.
Wow. Yeah,
it was extraordinary.
Why did you find Laura Ingalls Wilder to be such a fascinating subject?
I've written about her a few times in the past, but I guess I started where everybody else did, which was, as a fan of her work as a kid. I read all the Little House books. I loved them. I read them over and over again. And I think I always had a sense that there was some personal connection to my family because I'm from, an immigrant farming families from the Midwest, and so I had heard them tell stories about the farm and how tough that life was. So I think that I was always kind of drawn to the Little House books because they reflected that part of my family's past.
Like many others and you, I grew up reading and rereading all the Little House books. Why do you think they're so popular?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, for one thing, they're just great books. They're great children's literature. They tell stories that are incredibly engaging. There's something really soothing and comforting even about a lot of the way in which things are described, even though there are a lot of hazards throughout the books, natural disasters and so forth. There are these wonderful descriptions of, how Pa builds the log cabin and how he makes the door and how he makes bullets for his gun and how, Ma makes cheese. And, they're just these sort of wonderful things that you can lose yourself in as a kid. And so I think that is a really powerful part of their appeal. But there's more to it than that. I think that they remain really popular because they do capture something really central about the American experience. They're about the frontier, about pioneering, and they provide a kind of origin story for those of us who came that route.
How did they build upon and perpetuate myths of westward expansion and pioneer life?
They really, especially through the most famous book, which is Little House on the Prairie, they really provided a kind of child's view of what that was all about, of what the whole project of moving westward entailed and what it was like, and how it was, on the one hand, an incredible adventure of going to places where white settlers had not previously been. In her case, it was Kansas. But they also gave this kind of, child's eye view of manifest destiny, of this idea that that white settlers had the right to spread out and take land that did not, in fact, belong to them.
You begin the book actually with the U.S. Dakota War, which ended in 1862. Why was this event so pivotal in setting the stage for pioneers like the Ingalls and the Wilders and Manifest Destiny?
Well, the more I found out about that event, which is mentioned in Little House on the Prairie at a couple of really pivotal moments, the more I was convinced that it was really an important part of the background of the Ingalls family's life and experience, and so many other families, because it really was the moment when white settlers really came up against the fact of what they were trying to do. I mean, they were taking land. There had been a number of treaties that were worked out that were incredibly unfair and deceitful, really, on behalf of the government. And in 1862, the Dakota tribe essentially rose up and attacked white settlers in Minnesota, which really changed the whole game. It was really the beginning of the Plains Indian Wars, which would then, take place over the next 30-some years. But it really set the stage for Laura Ingalls' life, even though it happened a few years before she was born.
What was her relationship to Native Americans in the books and in her life?
In the books, you see them largely in Little House on the Prairie because that's when she, as a child of around 5, actually encountered Osage Indians in Kansas, because her father, who was a squatter, basically just settled down on land that belonged to the Osage in a territory that was specifically marked as not open to white settlement. So she then became a part of that whole squatters movement in Kansas. And the funny thing is, I don't think as an adult she had much understanding of either the individual tribes that she was writing about or the history behind what her family had done. But she nonetheless had these very specific, dramatic memories of encounters with Indians. And so she just wrote about those. She laid that out. And it became, I think, a very emblematic treatment of whites' interaction with Indians at that time.
There were a lot of brutal realities in pioneer life. What did you want to illuminate in her life in this book that we wouldn't know just by reading her books or watching the hugely popular TV series?
Yeah, I mean, I was really interested in getting at some of the economic realities behind their lives, because that, I think, really gets lost in the telling of the stories in her books. She really shied away from anything that portrayed her family in a less than positive light. She really wanted to memorialize her parents in the Little House books. She said this over and over again, and so she leaves out all the stuff about their debts, about the inability to really bring crops to market and make a living as a farmer, and so
even the death of her younger brother.
That's right. Yeah, the as scholars have pointed out, there's no death in the Little House books. She left out the birth and death of her little brother, Freddie, which came about really in the aftermath of one of these really terrible economic disasters for the family after the locust plague of the 1870s. So by trying to sort of explain what the cyclical nature of these financial panics that just, came along once every few years, really, in her early life, I hoped to kind of show people how it was almost impossible for farmers to make a living then, for any kind of small scale farming to be successful or sustainable. And her father surely did encounter that.
Given that she curated so much of her own public history, how did you uncover that wider reality about her life?
Well, a lot of these things have been known to some extent for a long time. Her manuscripts, some of them, the unpublished manuscript that was left at her death, was published in the 1970s. That's called The First 4 Years. And that really explained what had happened to her after her marriage, which was just a series of disasters, really. And so a lot of these things...
Which we never knew about.
Yeah, which, earlier readers had not been aware of. And so I think a lot of that really has been out there, but I wanted to look at the history behind her life and show how her life was just so emblematic of all these major movements that have to do with, white settlement and the Plains Indian Wars, and even on to the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, because she wrote the books during that time in the 1930s. And you can really see a lot of her response to that in certain passages in the books.
You mentioned the locusts. That's one of the most memorable stories I recalled, or I guess they're grasshoppers, locusts. They destroy their wheat crop. Yeah. You explained this is a huge disaster across the plains, one of the worst in our history. It left people in real danger of starvation, yet authorities in the East, even cities in the Midwest, were pretty unsympathetic to their plight. What does that story show us about how American society at that time viewed pioneers like the Ingalls and the Wilders?
Yeah, it's really a kind of a major national crisis and a tragedy for everybody who was caught up in it. And it does indeed show that there was a real limited amount of patience by, the federal authorities and people in the East generally. You see a lot of really unsympathetic editorials in newspapers from the East.
Pretty shocking.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, the language. And yet, if you look at some of the language that we currently see in, political discourse now, there's a lot of similarities there between, we're tired of these people asking for more money. We're tired of, there's a certain lack of sympathy for immigrants, and so you can see that there's hasn't maybe been as much change in the political discourse as you might think.
It's instructive because, we have sort of a golden view of these times from her books, but even generally we think, oh, things were better back then. I'm like, well, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Maybe people didn't take care of each other.
Right.
How does her life offer a window to explore other key points in the evolution of America and American identity?
Well, it's interesting to look at the origins of her family and how they came to this country. Her ancestors arrived with the Puritans and were Puritans. And so she offers this extraordinary kind of, you can see sort of the way stations of American history throughout the generations of that family. I talk a little bit about her great-grandfather Samuel Ingalls, who actually appears in Little House in the Big Woods, not by name, but he's Charles Ingalls' grandfather. And she tells this wonderful story about him, about her grandfather Lansford, when he was a boy, sledding, creeping off on the Puritan Sabbath with his brothers to sled down this hill. And as they're sledding down, this is completely forbidden, of course, because you're not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath. And as they go down the hill, this pig steps out of the woods and is picked up on their sled and begins squealing its head off. And this, of course, wakes up their father, who has fallen into a stupor after the incredibly long sermon at church. So it's a wonderful story that kind of shows you how that Puritan past was, still very much present, even up until Charles Ingalls' grandfather's life, and how the various generations had sort of fallen away from some of those things, and yet they still retained that deep belief in self-reliance, that you didn't take anything from anybody else, unless, of course, they were Native Americans. That was okay, but in their view. But they really just had this complete devotion to that idea that you had to provide for yourself. And this goes a long way to explaining Wilder's own distaste for the New Deal in the 1930s.
Which was taking place during the Dust Bowl, and you touch on the fact that one of the other iconic things in this book is that the settlers, like them, who went out to the plains, altered the plains irrevocably.
Yes, they certainly did, and I think this was not...
Which eventually led to the Dust Bowl.
Yeah. I mean, in the 1890s, you see a kind of early version of the Dust Bowl, which is part of what drove Wilder and her husband out of that region, and which is why they ended up living in the Missouri Ozarks, so far away from her family. And I think that that move really spurred her to want to write about them, because she'd been separated from them basically for the rest of her life.
I think you first came to Laura's story through her daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, when there were allegations years ago about her being the real author of the Little House books. Rose had a tenuous connection to the truth sometimes. She became a writer during the era of yellow journalism. What was her actual role in writing the books?
Well, it's complicated. I mean, she, I think, is probably responsible for the books in large part because she, as a professional writer, had connections to agents, to publishers. She was once, much more famous than her mother. And she, I think, very early on saw the commercial potential in her mother's stories. She'd been hearing these stories all her life since she was a little girl, and she knew that all these sort of dramatic tales about blizzards and locusts and Indians really potentially had could be sold to magazines or publishers. So she began, I think, urging her mother very early on to do something with that material. And I think her mother had always wanted to do this as well. There are indications quite early on that she was trying to write a version of her memoir.
As you uncovered some of the realities of Laura Ingalls Wilder's life and pioneer life, did you ever feel sad that the stories you loved in childhood weren't quite the reality she offered?
I didn't feel sad, because I guess to me the reality is almost as interesting, if not more interesting, than the stories themselves. I think the stories are wonderful, and the experience of reading them remains really powerful. I still find them very moving to read. But the reality is also just another layer of fascinating background to the stories that you love. So I don't think that it really takes anything away from them. But certainly people may feel differently.
How did this process compare to previous books and articles that you've done?
Well, I had the luxury of revisiting this material several times over the years. First with a kind of long piece that I wrote for the New York Review of Books about Rose and about her role in editing and shaping the books, and then edited the Library of America's Little House books that came out in a 2-volume edition. So that gave me an incredible kind of preparation to do something like this. And so you don't often get that kind of, backgrounding in a subject. So I was really fortunate in this project to have previously done a lot of work on the manuscripts and the editing the books themselves and writing notes about the text, and all of that really contributed to what I was doing in the biography.
We have a robust writing community in New Mexico, and also people doing history and biography. What is that community like for you? Is it a very supportive community you can draw upon?
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, I've met people in Santa Fe who are very involved in founding the Biographers International group. James McGrath Morris is a good friend who was instrumental in founding that group, which was really helpful to me in terms of, conferences and learning stuff about how to approach certain problems and issues that you face as a biographer.
What has the project done in terms of inspiring future books or writing projects for you?
I think I would love to, take up more work. I don't know whether a book or possibly articles, but I really love children's literature. I think it's really a fascinating topic that opens up a lot of questions about influence and identity, about how we kind of shape our identity around stories that we've heard as kids. So I'd love to do more work in that field.
Well, Caroline Fraser, thank you so much for coming and talking with us.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been great.